Hello and welcome to the Indoor Environment Show. I'm Bob Krell. I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine, and I'm joined today by my co-host, as always, Don Weeks, who is the president of the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQGA. Hey, Don, how are you?
Yes, hi. How are you? It's been a while, and it's good to see you today. And we have some really terrific guests. I'm looking forward to having the conversation today.
Yeah, well, and things are going well in your world here. It's our first show of 2022.
Yeah,
Um,
we're hanging in there. We're trying to get through the pandemic, but everything's good at the moment. I hope that that's the case with you too.
Yeah, I mean, we're both in the North Country, so we're feeling the Arctic blast here. There's nothing really fun in January. Today's show, though, I think is really a great show to start out the this new year with.
I agree.
Topic is very timely, and so I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's bring our guests in, and Don, you can do the introductions.
So our first guest is Dr. William Bahnfleth, who is a professor of architectural engineer at Penn State University and past director of the Indoor Environmental Center at Penn State. He holds BS, MS, and Ph.D. degrees in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and is a registered professional engineer. Dr. Bahnfleth is a fellow of ASHRAE, ASME, and ISIAC. He's a vice president at IEQGA and a past president of ASHRAE. Dr. Bahnfleth organized and serves as chair of the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force. He's a member of the ASHRAE Environmental Health Committee and of committees writing position documents on indoor carbon dioxide and infectious aerosols. So welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Don. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and our second guest is Dr. Marwa Zaatari, who is a partner in ZINE Partners based in Austin, Texas. Dr. Zaatari has a Ph.D. in Environmental and Water Resources Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin in the Architectural and Civil Engineering Department. She also has an MS in Projects and in the Built Environment from the American University of Beirut and a BE in HVAC, Energy and Controls for the Mechanical Engineering Department of the Lebanese University in Lebanon. Welcome, Marwa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we go any further, I think I should like to stress that this show is a joint collaborative effort between the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate, ISIAC, and the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQGA, in partnership with Healthy Indoors to bring you this show.
And today's webcast is sponsored by IEQGA and its member organization, ASHRAE, with financial support from Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. So with no further ado, why don't we get started?
So
Bill,
we'll let you lead off.
Yeah, I'm going to lead off with the first question for Bill, which is your education. Obviously, as we were just describing, is primarily in mechanical engineering from Illinois University of Urbana-Champaign. How did you become interested in indoor air quality?
Well, that's an interesting question, at least for me. I started out like most mechanical engineers who were educated in the 1970s and 80s, being focused on energy efficiency, which was a big deal at that time. But I came to Penn State in 1994, and one of my first doctoral students was a guy named Wally Kowalski, and he had come from the nuclear industry where he had been working for years to get a PhD, and he had read about the growing risk from infectious diseases and felt that there was a pandemic coming and he wanted to do something about it. So he came to Penn State and wanted to study methods of controlling infection risk, and he eventually focused on ultraviolet air disinfection, which is now something I've been working on for 25 years. But so shortly after that, we had the anthrax mailings in 2001 that created more interest in controlling bioaerosols, and I went on sabbatical, and that was where I decided I was going to redirect to IAQ and form the Indoor Environment Center that you mentioned. And so over basically a period of 5 years, I switched from being a typical energy-focused engineer to deciding the rest of my career was going to be mainly about indoor air quality.
I think that a lot of people have made that switch over the years, but you weren't one of the first. So that's good background. Thank you. Marwa, my question for you is somewhat similar. Your education prior to the University of Texas was in mechanical engineering and engineering management, but you changed a bit when you went to the University of Texas to go into environmental and water resources engineering. And also your PhD dissertation was about pollution controls. How did you become interested in indoor air quality?
So like Bill, I started being interested in energy. And as long as I remember, actually, when I was a child, I was really interested in the idea of energy conservation. I grew up in Lebanon and we didn't have electricity. Unfortunately, we still do not have electricity. So, but for a long time, I really wanted to do something to help fix the energy problem. So in Lebanon, I joined the mechanical engineering department and focused on the HVAC. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning system. I knew that it had, a big role to play in the energy conservation. And then during my master's, I focused on energy and controls, and I started to read about the sick building syndrome. I started to read about, the downside or the unintended consequences of doing, a building with energy savings. We are building our building tight, and that is impacting basically people health. So I was so lucky to find a program at University of Texas at Austin. We had these amazing professors, Dr. Jeffrey Siegel, Richard Corsi, Dr. Kerry Kinney, Dr. Attila Novozalak. So was really interested to pursue with them this indoor air quality path. And it seemed like I did a big movement, but actually my dissertation was focused on finding exposure reduction strategies, while at the same time not wasting energy. So kind of the background blended between the intersection of indoor air quality and energy efficiency.
Yeah, I saw that in your paper there. That's the dissertation. So Bob, you have a question?
No. I was just letting you roll here and moving you around.
We've
been off here for a couple months.
I know.
It's cold.
It's cold, yes. Bill, back to you a little bit. One of your early 2000 publications entitled Effective UVGI System Design Through Improved Modeling. And UVGI, or ultraviolet germicidal irradiation systems, have become more prevalent with COVID-19, and there's been a number of papers on that. Can you tell me what your thoughts are about the use of UVGI systems as part of the methods used to reduce the airborne transmission of the coronavirus?
Yeah, well, that's been something I've been looking at for a long time. And of course, it's not a new technology. It was used very effectively in some trials in schools by Wells and Wilder from Penn. And I think it's a great technology that's underutilized. It tends to be viewed as being a healthcare specific technology, but it's been very effective in other settings as well. So I think it's going to increase in use because of the attention that it's gotten during the pandemic. And there are also new technologies emerging like far UVC that is safer for human exposure, that I think that and LEDs are going to create an even wider spectrum of applications for its use.
Do you think it makes the application of using it in HVAC versus using it in just the ambient environments, which is more appropriate way to use UV's technology?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think if you look at like a square meter cost for a system, you can apply UV to larger areas cost effectively if you put into an air handling unit, but the clean air delivery rate you're going to get is limited to the airflow of the system. I think one of the best applications in an HVAC system is keeping the coil clean. That's something else we've done research on. That's very effective. But if I was really concerned primarily about infection control, it's clear that what are currently called upper room GUV systems, because we can't expose occupants to the 254 nanometer UVC, are much more effective. If we describe their performance in equivalent air changes per hour, 10, 20, 30 air changes per hour. So that's really phenomenal performance if you can get it. And the big problem with it is the cost really per unit area.
And I'm assuming these are units that are effectively pulling air through with some type of fan device and bringing them through a UVC radiating them, or just
Uh,
radiating a whole area in the
in the
space?
space, they're actually fixtures that may be open or louvered
Oh,
to create a disinfection zone, and so they interact with the air circulation in the space to disinfect. And so that's one of the
so
hard
more
things.
more convectively is what you're saying.
Yeah, is
Okay.
knowing how well they're going to perform, because there is that coupling with a part of the system that you're not really designing to work with the UV.
Great, thank you. I was wondering about that. So back to Marwa first for the next question. I was wondering if you could give us some information about the findings of this paper that you did back in 2013, the relationship between filter pressure drop, indoor air quality, and energy consumption in rooftop HVAC units.
Yes, so we started the work in 2011, and it was at that time, and it's ironic we still have the same question during the pandemic, is, if you use a high efficiency filter, you're gonna choke your system, you're gonna have a high pressure drop, resistance to the airflow basically, and as such, you're gonna have large energy penalties. So at that time, 2011, we didn't have any study that did this for commercial buildings or to help to answer the question, is it correct or not? So what is the magnitude of impact on energy and indoor air quality? So we set to the study to answer the question. So what happened when you go from a MERV 8 low efficiency filter to a higher MERV, like 11, 13, 14? So what happened from energy consumption? We focus on the fan power, the compressor power, the cooling capacity, and what happened from indoor air quality perspective. At that time, we took a look at PM 2.5 and PM 10. So this happened in tandem with another project that was funded by ASHRAE. So we had the opportunity to do 2 years of field testing. I've spent 2 years on the roof in Austin, Texas, and Pennsylvania. It happened that the field work either happened in the summer in Austin or in the winter in Pennsylvania. But basically, we did this field measurement. It was very comprehensive. So we measured fan pressure drop, fan pressure rise, filter pressure drop, the fan power. We measured outside air percentage, supply airflow, return airflow, particulate matter of different sizes, indoors and outdoors. And then we did modeling using data from the field to get the cooling capacity and the compressor power. And then we had a database of 75 filters that are, you can find on the market. And then we also had a database of 15 filters that are fouled. So not only we answered the question for clean conditions of filters, but also for a small subset of them, what happened when they are fouled. So we'll share with you some of the results. The first one was a revelation for me. That MERV does not equal MERV. So today, if you tell me that you have a MERV 13, I wouldn't be able to tell approximately what is the pressure drop or what is the efficiency. And in fact, in my work, I showed that there's a weak relationship between MERV and pressure drop. In other words, you can have a low efficiency filter that have a higher pressure drop than a high efficiency filter. The other thing is that because the way the standard 52.2 ASHRAE is set, it's a little bit, for the same MERV category, you can have a wide range of efficiency depending on the particle distribution that you're dealing with. So just jumping to the finding is that if you move from a MERV 8 to a MERV 11, you have a moderate energy consumption and not so much increase in clean air delivery rate for the set that we had in particulate matter. But when you go from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13, you have a moderate energy increase, around 2 to 3% increase in cooling capacity, but you have some 3 times better clean air delivery in PM 2.5. So that was really good to know. It's not true that you incur a large energy consumption and you have a small energy increase, but it's totally justified by the benefits you get, again, from PM 2.5 perspective and more so from PM 10. And just to end with this, it's the same for fouled condition. So at the end of the life of the filter, when it's completely fouled, although the filters that we used, all of them, they increase in efficiency with time. As such, like MERV 8 became MERV 11, MERV 13 became MERV 15, and the benefits difference between 8 and 13 diminish when the filter is fouled. So still MERV 13 offered advantages over MERV 8, but they were less than at clean conditions. And I'm happy to say that during the pandemic, we actually expanded the database from 75 filters to 140 filters, and still the same findings. There is no correlation between pressure drop and MERV. So just to end this, you can actually have a high efficiency filter if you pick it correctly and you look at some of the standard data without incurring a large energy penalty, basically.
Yeah, and that's obviously a very critical part of what people are looking at in buildings right now. They're trying to make a determination what is the best way to have energy efficiency and have good indoor air quality as well. So sounds like an interesting area to study right now. So thank you for telling us about that.
So, hey, Don, I wanted to point out we do have quite
Yeah.
a few live members in the audience on the online community today. And we have activated the live chat function there. So if you're watching the show live from our community, you can actually ask questions, post some questions for our guests today, both Bill and Marwa. Be happy to entertain those. We'll be moderating those from afar with Healthy Indoors editor Susan Valenti. She's on the line with that.
Great, thanks. That sounds great. So, Bill, I was going to ask you about your most recent publication that you had in the CV, which was Control of Airborne Infectious Disease in Buildings, Evidence and Research Priorities. Can you give us a little idea of what the research priorities are going forward?
Sure. And of course, that paper, the lead author was Jacob Bueno de Mesquita, who some of the people who were listening may know. He's at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and other authors were from LBNL. I want to say that it's, as an aside, it's the longest paper I think I've ever been involved in. It's 25,000 words, and over 300 references are cited. So it's got a really thorough literature review in it. But so at the end of all of that are the research priorities, and I think they're defined probably pretty concisely by the knowledge gaps that are noted. I think there are a lot of things that we don't know about viral aerosols yet. What is the shedding rate of various pathogens that we're concerned about? How do they distribute within the spectrum of aerosol sizes? These are all important things in terms of control. And Marwa was talking about mechanical filters and their efficiencies. It's important not only to know what the efficiency characteristics of the filter are, but what are the particle size characteristics of what you're trying to control. You need both to actually know how well it's going to perform. And I think there's a related big gap that needs to be filled by research on risk assessment. We're 3 years into the COVID pandemic, and I don't think that we really have highly accurate ways of assessing what infection risk is. We're typically mostly focused still on Wells-Riley airborne transmission models, but we know that there's this close range transmission that has other characteristics, and that the dose response characteristics of pathogens need to be known better. So all of that will help us to determine what controls are necessary. And so then if we move more into the engineering side of things, we have certainly discovered recently that there's a lot that we don't know about almost any aspect of control that you could name. Recent literature reviews on ventilation rates and infection control say, well, it's clear that more ventilation reduces risk, but we don't know enough about it to specify what the ventilation rate should be. And we've also clearly seen that lots of air cleaners are not very well understood. Some of them, it's simply a matter of not being able to specify their use effectively enough. UV, like we were talking about, it's pretty well established in terms of its performance, but there are others where we're not sure that they work and we're not sure that they're safe. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And another area is air distribution. We have also learned during the pandemic that our understanding of how say air flows that are created by the HVAC system in a building interact with in-room air cleaners and on and on. So there are many priorities that go from the basic science of disease transmission to risk analysis in specific environments to the controls that we have and how we use them. So it's an agenda that will take a long time to work out.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. But I thought the paper was very well written, and it certainly outlined a whole bunch of things that we do need to have as priorities going forward. So, Marwa, you had a publication in 2020 with Hoy Bohannon called "The Effect of Ventilation and Filtration on Viral Infection in Residents." Can you give us some of the findings on that paper?
Yeah, so it was an article we wrote for the ASHRAE journal sometime in the fall of 2019, so early on. And at that time, we were seeing, the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force had done, I think, a great job in publishing what we need to do for our residents and how we can set up isolation rooms. But we still got a lot of questions. For example, like if you have an air cleaner, where you put it with the infected person or in the rest of the house. Is it better to invest in an air cleaner or it's better to basically up the efficiency of your filter? So we set this basically study to do some calculations to calculate relative risk and to compare different scenarios. We did it for a single family unit and for a mid-size home, and we did multiple scenarios. If you know that the person is infected or not, like what if you have a plumber that came to your house 2 hours and you don't know if he's infected or not, or friends, or what happened if you have a family member that is infected and you put him in an isolation room per ASHRAE basically recommendation. So we use the Wells-Riley model, and as Bill mentioned just before me, there's a lot of uncertainty in doing this. We use a peer-reviewed tool specifically on COVID. So that's why we set to do a relative risk. So instead of absolute risk of infection, relative risk, just to compare the different strategies. And then each person can decide on a cost-effective way to do it in their home.
Right.
So for example, if you have a person who is infected and he's in this isolation room, and you taped all the return diffusers and you have the bathroom fan on and you're doing everything correct, basically, you have the windows open, the bathroom fan on, and you are a caregiver coming inside the room for a few minutes to take care of this infected person, give him medication, talk to him, give him food, etc. What is your risk? And the first question is that if you have an air cleaner, do you put it next to this infected person or in the rest of the house? I heard a lot is that, it's logical to clean outside the house because the person's already infected. Why we want to clean his air or his or her air? It turned out in our calculation is that it's better, the most effective way to put the air cleaner next to the infected person. You decrease the risk by half. And if you both are wearing masks, decent, well-fitted mask, you decrease the risk as well by half. If you're doing both, you decrease it by 4 times. So on and so forth. So if you read the paper, there is specific examples comparing portable air cleaner versus high efficiency filter in your system. So it's specific to the scenarios we chose, but it helped to answer some questions.
We have a few questions coming up in the community, so I'm going to jump one in right now.
Okay.
Regarding high pressure drop with high filtration, are you looking at recent tech for HEPA filtration membranes that have extremely low pressure drop?
No, at that time, and even during the pandemic in the database, I only have from basically MERV 7 to MERV 14. So I'm not looking into the HEPA.
Okay.
All right, so I have a question for both of you, and this in regards to the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force. Obviously, you're both members, and Bill, you're the chair. What do you, in your opinion, has been the task force's most important accomplishment to date? And either one of you can start off.
Sure. Well, I actually came up with maybe 3 things that I think are important. One is that we got a fast start. It took over a year for public health authorities and then governments that were following their lead to recognize the importance of airborne transmission and mitigating airborne transmission. ASHRAE, like REVA in Europe and others, actually invoked the precautionary principle with respect to airborne risk in March or April of 2020. So, I'm very pleased that we were providing the right guidance from the beginning. I think obviously the fact that we have produced a body of guidance that's widely referenced and relatively simple is another important thing. And finally, communication. I think this has been really a big moment for building science and for organizations that work on indoor air quality, like ASHRAE, and the recognition of the importance of what we do has never been greater. And that's one of the things that I think the task force has helped to do.
Great. Marwa, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so the fast response, I cannot stress this enough. I don't know if you guys remember, but at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the questions, should we leave our HVAC system on? Should we replace our filters, maintain them? And I remember the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force was so fast to provide basically positions or statements or help answer all of these questions. And the other thing I would say, and I think it will outlast this pandemic, is that during the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force work, there was a big concatenating of all the different standards and guidelines and best practices into simple documents to help basically practitioners, consumers, the public in general. And not only that, they went above, I think, the standards, so above the minimum standards, and including infectious aerosols in the discussion. So I think a lot of the work from the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force will stay after the pandemic and will help inform a lot of our updates of our standards.
Great.
Yeah, I should follow up on that. We maybe sometimes hear the task force spoken of in the past tense. Actually, the guidance is pretty well built out, and we're not really updating that very much. But the rest of this ASHRAE Society year, this next 6 months, our goal, following on Marwa's comments, is really to set a path for the future. What do we do with what we've learned to improve standards and guidance, and to merge infection control with the what we hope will be a revolution in indoor air quality generally to promote wellness.
I mean, this is a very unique point in time for all of us, right, in the industry, because we've never had this keen awareness about indoor environments in our lifetimes, right? And I mean, I don't think there's ever at least that much of a focus globally.
Mm-hmm.
And many times I've brought this up over the last years. My concern is that we have this opportunity to drive these messages forward right now in this unique time, right, with the awareness. But what things do we need to do to make that happen? Because again, people's memory seems to be short on everything. As this thing starts to wane a little bit, and we're not nearly there, but as it does, I mean, I think people are going to, they'll get laissez-faire about it. How do we stop that from happening and use this horrible event or horrible series of events as an opportunity to actually push everything forward, make everything better? I know it's a loaded question. I'm just
no, you're right. We've seen emergencies be quickly forgotten, and we don't do anything. A number of times we were very interested in making buildings safe from bioterrorism 15, 20 years ago. And if we'd done that, we would have done a lot of the things that we're recommending now, but everyone forgot about it. I think mainly it's keeping the commitment going to actually do something, which means setting up structures that will make sure that the long-range plan is implemented. So we've gotten indoor environmental quality and resilience into the ASHRAE strategic plan. We're working on setting up a way of making sure that when we push the work that ASHRAE is doing out to technical committees that have other things on their plate, that someone will be making sure that work keeps going forward. And we have to keep communicating outwardly too. I think advocacy is going to be very big here, because it's going to take the kind of money that only governments can make available to do some of the research that's necessary, and to change policies, and to implement perhaps national standards that will help us to achieve these goals.
I mean, there's a lot of talk about this paradigm shift, right? But what is this? What is the paradigm shift right now? Has it actually occurred?
I'm gonna start with Marwa on that, because I think that Bill has put in the chat where the paper is that he participated in, and perhaps Marwa, you could give us a little bit of an idea of what your thoughts are on the paradigm shift, and then Bill, I think you can follow up with the what you have in that report.
Yeah, so I definitely think, like, a great awakening has occurred, and we all feel it. We feel it from, I don't know, our neighbors, where our kids go to school, from everything's happening around us. So I think a great awakening has occurred, definitely. And throughout this pandemic, I, as well as many other people, saw few revelation. So the first one, I would say that, people understood that the buildings they occupy are not healthy. I think this was a little bit, kind of a surprise. And they're not healthy because of two things. One is because our standards, the minimum standards, became maximum standards and were not established to address infectious aerosols. And you kind of see that in, I'm a member of a standard ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality. You kind of see that in the ventilation rates. It's very easy to see it if you compare the ventilation rate for offices, for what's required for gym, or what's required for a nail salon. You kind of directly see that, yeah, it's not meant to address actually, infectious aerosols. And very clearly it's stated under the table, the ventilation rate are not meant to address infectious aerosols. So first, even our minimum standards do not address what we're going through today. And not only that, we know that even the very well-designed buildings, they're not well operated. So it can be not healthy because our minimum standards do not address the problem, and also because we're not operating basically per what we should operate, even to the minimum. The other thing is that kind of also another revelation, although it's a novel virus, but we don't need novel technologies necessarily, because we have a lot of proven technologies. Some of them we have already in our buildings, like filters, ventilation, UVGI, for example, upper room GUV. So already the solutions exist. Yes, it requires cost investment, but as we all know, these cost investment can be justified by the greater benefit to the society, and not putting, you have a disease, but also you have, all the benefit that outweigh COVID, for example, allergy, other respiratory diseases. Other examples is, productivity, everyone's talking about it now, employee retention, wellness, etc. So the other revelation is, yes, like you can do the investment today and it will actually, outweigh the pandemic, basically. Okay. The other revelation is that, you can do these strategies, but not at the expense of energy. So, and I think the ASHRAE core recommendation did a very good job in January 2021 to say, it's okay for you to consider exposure reduction and energy and cost and comfort. So all of this revelation, I think we need to benefit from it to make this indoor air revolution that Bill was talking about, by basically, updating the standards, doing advocacy. And my job today is more in the operation of existing buildings. I think there is a lot of work to do in how we operate our buildings.
But I mean, it is key though that we also, we do include the indoor environments and energy, and and equally weigh these considerations. I mean, because that pendulum has swung back and forth several times in the past several decades, and you can't have one or the other, or one shouldn't supersede the other. We need everything, right? Would you agree?
I definitely agree, because it can be a vicious cycle. So if you spend so much energy to fix an indoor air quality problem, and then you want to ventilate your building, you bring pollution inside. So I call it the vicious cycle. So there is ways, to do it, in incorporating all of these strategies we talked about.
Great. So, Bill, you were a part of this paper that you listed in chat as, it recently published in 2021, a paradigm shift to combat indoor respiratory infection. And of course, I recognize a lot of the names on there. They're some of the most famous names in our field. So tell us a little bit about this paper and how it came about, and what does it actually conclude?
Sure. Well, this is one of the now many articles that have been written by the so-called Group of 36, which is a bunch of experts in various fields that Lydia Maraska convened way back in I think it was March or April of 2020 to try to talk to WHO about airborne transmission. I think that was really initially the goal that we had, and the direct communication route didn't have a lot of effect. And the group had very good chemistry and just started writing a lot of papers. There was a paper titled something like "How Can Airborne Transmission Indoors Be Controlled?" That's now been cited something like 600 times in the last year and a half. So over time, we went maybe from more scientific to somewhat more policy-focused kinds of writings, and that's what this article in Science is. And it's saying that there ought to be a different approach taken to prevention of infections indoors, that we tolerate a burden of disease from airborne transmission that we wouldn't accept, say, from sanitation or from water treatment. And so it tries to make the connection that we're simply accepting horrible consequences that we don't need to, and then goes on to describe some of the things that would need to be done to change the paradigm. From my point of view, it goes back to something that Marwa was talking about, which is the first thing you have to do is change your definition of what's acceptable. Once you've done that, the rest of it tends to follow. And I say when I give talks about this that our current definition of acceptable indoor air focuses on safety and satisfaction, not productivity or well-being in the sense that we are thinking about them today. So if we change the definition, then we can start to apply the technologies that we have to solve it. And I think, as Marwa already outlined, we don't need new technology to do better. We just need to use what we already have differently. Of course, this has also brought to light how much we don't know about control of infection risk and other aspects of indoor air quality because it hasn't been a priority for so long. So one of the things that needs to happen is to stimulate the investment in research that will help us to be able to attain this objective.
I mean, certainly areas like productivity and well-being are a little bit harder to quantify and measure, right? Those are trickier studies to come up with and be able to have a direct correlation, right? I know there's been
Yeah,
studies, the Harvard study, and some of the things that have
although we've been
shown
doing it
some
for
of this.
decades, I really like Joe Allen and John McCumber's book. It's making a case, remaking a case that was being made by Bill Fisk more than 20 years ago. One of the things that really made me understand that I was on the right track, focusing my career on IAQ, was going to one of the CLIMA conferences. It was the one in Helsinki, I think, in 2007, and Bill Fisk and Olli Seppänen presented a paper there on productivity and health is influenced by indoor air quality. I thought this is really something that everybody should know about, and it's important. And that's been one of the big motivations for me ever since, is to actually realize those gains that have been identified as feasible if we do a better job of controlling indoor air quality.
We have a couple of other questions that have popped up in the chat, so they're not necessarily in order, but I'm going to go with them anyway. So Paul asked, what is the state of the literature regarding the risks and potential harms of PCO technology? It's a little bit loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, I can say a little bit about that because I actually had a colleague who worked for one of the major companies that was trying to develop and commercialize it when maybe in the 1990s. PCO has been used a couple of ways. One is really kind of as a self-contained air cleaner, where the action goes on in the cleaner and you generate reactive species and they do their work there. But similar technologies are now being used to produce reactive species that are actually put into room air. State of the technology, there was a good review paper written by some of the people who'd been doing the development in those days, and they cited two things as being barriers to use of PCO for IAQ control. One was not really understanding what the byproducts were of incomplete decomposition of VOCs. So they were concerned about hazardous byproducts. And the other thing was, at the time at least, the catalyst, the titanium dioxide catalyst, and the tendency of it to become contaminated, and for those devices to lose their effectiveness. So you've got one of the key issues with all reactive species air cleaners now, which is what exactly are they doing to air quality unintentionally, and also a practical consideration that the life of the technology wasn't as good as they had hoped it would be.
Marwa, you got anything to add to that at this point?
Oh, hang on.
Oh, we lose her?
Yeah, I muted her again. I got you. There you go.
I echo what Bill said. And also there is a very nice review paper recently published by Dr. Delphine Farmer and Dr. Doug Collins. It's called Unintended Consequences of Air Cleaners. It's only, I think, 3 pages, but it goes over the latest research we have in terms of the consequences of using reactive air cleaners. Also, it goes with other basic technologies. So just want to put it out there. It's a great review paper.
If you could, when you have a chance, send us the link to that paper. We'll put that up on the website, and then in other locations as well. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
So we have another fairly long question. It's going to take more than one screen to show it, but we'll start here. So the comment is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on improving IAQ standards, both from a guiding philosophy, i.e. moving from acceptable to some kind of infection control, and in practical requirements. Do we increase minimum rates of filtration, and by how much, given the uncertainties, and on a time scale of what we do nowish, and not when we've learned more reduced uncertainties? That's a long one.
That is a long question. Well, I think clearly filter standards can be upgraded from where they are. MERV 8 is not doing much to control particles that have health effects, and so I think the low-hanging fruit is raising basic particulate filtration to a level that's effective. Beyond that, I think the answer's got to be, in part, air cleaners, because of the energy impact of ventilation. We can only do so much to mitigate the impact of ever increasing outdoor air. And to be able to use air cleaners effectively, we need standards and certification programs. That's already been set in motion by several organizations. ASHRAE is working on method of test standards that could be used in certifications for air cleaners, and AHRI, the big manufacturers trade association that certifies a lot of products, is also looking at the same issue. So that's kind of the way I see it going in the short term. And I think that some national leadership would be helpful in different countries. Just taking the US as an example, we have a national code basis energy efficiency standard, ASHRAE 90.1, that over 25 or 30 years reduced the minimum acceptable energy consumption of a building by over 50%. We have no national consensus air quality standard. So just getting one, even if it was 62.1 today, would be a pretty good start.
Yeah, and that brings up a point that, as was mentioned a couple of times, the 62.1 is for ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality. Acceptable is the key word there, though, isn't it? It may not necessarily be good for all, and it's certainly not necessarily putting it forward as a maximum standard. There are other ways we can maximize indoor air quality protection if we increase the ventilation. So I'll put that out to you both of our guests. I'll start with you, Marwa. What's your thoughts? You're a member, as am I, and as Bill, of 62.1. What should we be doing differently, do you think?
So also you are a member of the Guideline 42P, which is...
Yes, we are, yeah.
Going beyond the minimums in 62.1. So There is
Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because it's self-serving. I say something, but if you're a member of the team, go ahead and say something about it.
Sure. So there are, there is a lot of opportunity to improve the standard from indoor air quality. So to up the bar from the minimum. There is, the ventilation rates. We're talking about, the ventilation rate when it comes the rate per person, the rate per area for different space types. There is the fact that we don't require high efficiency filtration in our systems. And the fact that a lot of our systems do not require even filtration. If they don't do dehumidification, you don't have to filter, for example, return air. There's also will be a newly published addendum, which is the performance-based procedure, but it doesn't go into infectious aerosols per se. So in general, we can bring infectious aerosols inside the standard. What I learned is that, the standard only cover what we think it's typical. So usual sources, typical events. So even we don't cover fires, for example. That's like in a different guideline, sort of. So one way to make the standard more reflect the reality is to have it, recognize that, for example, fires are happening seasonally. They're not one-time-off event. Infectious aerosols are a reality, and add, what we know today inside the standard. And Guideline 42P started really long time ago, like maybe 6 or 7 years. I don't remember. But it aimed to up the minimum from the standard. So it takes each section from the standard and try to say, maybe we can do better. And here's our best practices. And here how we can go beyond the minimums. And don't correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't address in a large scale infectious aerosols, right? Because of
That's
the
right.
Right. Yeah, it started a long time before the pandemic came along.
Yes,
it did, and it is out for well after the meeting this next week. It should be out for public review, a second public review. So if you're interested in finding out more about enhanced indoor air quality and what ASHRAE is up to, look for the public review and offer your comments. So, Bill, you have something to add to that at this point?
Yeah, I think Marwa reminded me. I do think it's important to have our standards not just be for normal operation, and that we should be trying to put some provisions into standards like 62.1 to address operation during an infectious disease outbreak or during a wildfire if you're in a region that is affected by them. Because one of the things we found during COVID is that the buildings we've been building are pretty hard to upgrade to provide the level of protection we'd like them to have. And obviously, if there was some planning that went into that, some foresight, we made some preparations that weren't too expensive in terms of the first cost of the system so that it could operate differently when necessary, we would be ready to go next time, and it wouldn't take us, we wouldn't have buildings that are still trying to figure out what modifications are going to be implemented 3 years into a pandemic.
Right. Yeah, that should have been something that we should have been able to implement in a regularly, very quick basis. But unfortunately, it hasn't occurred that way. Hey, Bob, you have a question?
Yeah, that was definitely problematic. Hopefully, well, and that was to my point earlier. Is what can we do to ensure that we take this experience and learn from it collectively, globally? Because this obviously is a global issue. This is not the last global pandemic that we will probably even see in our lifetimes. So how do we deal with that? It's a question. Anyway, we have a couple more questions from the audience. One's actually a comment, but we'll go with that. Terry, it's not Terry, I hope. Terry wrote this. I hope you're right that changing the definition from acceptable indoor air to healthy indoor air. Keep in mind that in 1994, OSHA issued the draft IAQ regulations. I remember those. They were excellent at the time, but they never really went into final
effect.
Because there was tons of opposition. It was widespread opposition. So how do we ensure that any measures that we try to do now won't face the same opposition from private interest groups?
Well, I think we have to recognize that any measures we recommend now will face opposition from private interest groups, and be ready to to engage and to stay engaged. I mean, this is what the whole standards process is about, is all of these competing interests trying to come to a consensus. Nobody's happy at the end, but if you engage and put the effort into making a good case for why changes should be made, then some of them will happen. But if you just sit back and say, it's obvious, then you're going to lose. And that's what has happened many times. So to me, at the policy and standards level, the big part of this is making the economic case extremely clearly. We can't do that quite as well as we'd like to now, but I think that from the point of view of influencing legislation and national standards, when you show what this does to the economic conditions in a country, to have less illness and to have higher productivity, it becomes a no-brainer at that point if you can get that analysis to be accepted. Allen et al. Have done it. Fisk did it. Those of us who want this to happen need to keep making that case to those who are in a position to influence what happens.
That's challenging, though, because we have a hard time getting people to accept climate change issues too. So it's not like science is always welcomed with open arms. We have a couple other ones. I'll just get up here. Your suggestions on how to use an HVAC system and how to handle during the pandemic. You got cut off. Oh boy. Okay. We're going to take that one. Just move it right on through. When will the ASHRAE update guidelines for the application of upper air, upper room, ultraviolet germicidal devices to control the transmission of airborne pathogens be published?
I'm wondering what exactly is meant by that. There are 2 chapters in the ASHRAE handbook now that deal with germicidal UV, and there are standards on UV systems. I think an area that's developing is upper room standards, and that is a standards process, so it's taking a while, but both ASHRAE and IES, and I think IUVA as well, are all working in that arena. So I don't have a date to give you as to when there will be updated guidelines, but there's work ongoing to improve the guidance for application of GUV.
Great, thank you. We're getting down to the last few minutes. I have a few more questions that are a little bit off, but I think are good for to talk about. And start with you, Marwa, and talk about. I want you to tell us a little bit about your work with ZINE partners and what kind of projects are you working on?
Sure. Yeah. So we're focusing on performance-based approaches, one of my favorite words to say, which it means basically, rather than to say, there is one size fits all, to try to understand more the building itself and the goals for the building itself. I'm focusing all my work on existing buildings. And we have this new model that we are doing. It's called the Clean Air as a Service model, Clean Air as a Service. What it basically does, it follows the molecule that you are breathing inside and where is it going. So some of it's coming from outdoor air, some of it is being recirculated. And you have the choke points, which are the filters, and then the coils, and then the fan goes back into the basically the room. So part of this is doing a lot of testing to answer some basic questions. I did this filter design, and when do I need to change my filters? What is the intersection between how long the filter can stay versus how much energy is gonna cost me versus the integrity of the filter? Same thing for the cooling and the heating coil. When do I need to clean my coils? What do I need to do? And we're doing this as a basically research with collaboration with large portfolio managers to create indoor air quality programs for them. And it's very exciting because, for example, if you look at our standard today, it says visually inspect your coils. But it turned out, after taking so many different biologicals, so bacteria and fungi sampling, just visually looking at your coils will not tell you when to need to clean your coils. And there was, a few papers back, mainly by Dr. Jeffrey Siegel, to say, that are medically relevant, for example, bacteria and fungi on your coils that you have to take attention to. So my work is focused on that now, is to figure out the basic of indoor air quality programs, and mainly to answer this indoor air quality operation program. So the people that are operating our buildings, the facility engineer, the chief building engineer, they can understand the indoor air quality intention of this system and can able to answer the basic question and able to operate even if there is something wrong going on. So they will understand why they're doing what they're doing in terms of their heating, ventilation, air conditioning system.
One of the things that, I just have to jump in here, Marwa, on this, because the coils are just a bone of contention for me. I guess I see, I get involved a lot as an IQ consultant, being out and doing HVAC hygiene. And it amazes me that we're still designing mechanical equipment that puts these massive deep coils, and then stacks them together, puts a cooling and a heating coil, stacks them within several inches of each other, where it's impossible to service them. Nobody could ever, without literally pulling the coil out of a big 100-ton unit, you couldn't really clean it properly.
Yeah.
And why are we still building these things? I get it, in the 60s and 70s we did that, but how in 2020 do we have systems coming off the shelf like that?
Yeah, I think the intersection gaining area for the surface transfer, but there are new ways to do this. For example, using enzymes or probiotics, and that can basically work into your system. The funny thing is that when you ask someone, why do you have this indoor air quality operation program, they will tell you, I followed the standard. The standards say clean as needed or visually inspect. So kind of see the big divide between what actually the research say, which have amazing research, what the standards say, and what do we have in practice. And I vow to myself through my work here is, do research based, so intention to do research, so we can basically get back to the standards. So it will be like a feedback loop. Maybe answer this one question, standard 180. When do you need to clean your coils? So we have this, I think a lot of measurements. I'm doing a lot of measurements. It's very exciting. Taking some fun stuff, like for example, infrared images on the coils, so heating and the cooling coils. So sometimes the coils are really dirty. You just want to run. Sometimes they are visually clean, but the data show that they're actually dirty because you don't see this thin biofilm. So there's a lot what we need to understand in terms of really, when you implement a solution, what actually you're getting from indoor air quality or health perspective.
Excellent.
So, Bill, I want to follow up with what research and papers are you working on currently? What can you tell us about some of the activities that you've been doing with research?
Sure. Well, keeping really busy, still with the G36 group, where we're almost through all the hoops to get a paper published on the history of the misunderstanding of airborne disease transmission. But closer to home, the actual research that I'm doing, we've been doing measurements of coronavirus susceptibility to UVC. We've looked at both NL63, which causes cold-like symptoms, and SARS-CoV-2, and we're hoping to publish something on that shortly. Starting some work on the fundamental mechanism of UV disinfection, looking at the genomes of various microorganisms, and also been doing some more practical applied work on upper room GUV systems, the impact of air distribution design on their performance. That so far has mainly been CFD modeling, but we'd like to extend it into some experimental work. And the other thing is air cleaners and in-room performance. Marwa said she was doing something on that. I've actually got a contract with a manufacturer that produces an air cleaner that emits reactive species. I felt that if we were going to criticize them and say there wasn't enough peer-reviewed literature on it, then we ought to be studying them. So I've got some work in progress to try to model an ROS producing air cleaner and to see how that works and compares with other types of infection control, UV and HEPA filters and others. So a lot of things going on.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. So that's our hour, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bob to close us out. But thank you to our two guests. I appreciate it. And again, thank you to ASHRAE and to SOM in terms of the sponsorship for this. So back to you, Bob.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks again. I really appreciate Bill and Marwa's time. That was great. That was a great talk. Wish we had more time. It always goes so fast. But we'll have you on again sometime. Whatever. Wow.
Three
I spent
times.
too much time in the ISIAC conference this week online, so it's my brain's kind of, totally overabsorbed. Again, reminding this program, Indoor Environment Show, is a joint collaboration between ISIAC, the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate, and the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQGA. They got together with Healthy Indoors to help get this show out there and available to the public. So thanks very much to the organizations. As always, we'll be back. I believe in February, because we're working on the 2022 schedule right now. Stay tuned. Again, you'll be able to watch the replays of this show and any of our previous episodes of the Indoor Environment Show on the Healthy Indoors global community. That's at global.healthyindoors.com, and it's free and all available. So thanks to everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.